Well, I have in the studio with me today Dr. Jason Ormiston, who is one of our Bible faculty members, teaches in the School of Religion in the seminary, and also is the pastor of Palmetto Baptist Church. And Jason, it is a delight to have you here today.
It's great to be here.
You recently preached, I know you preach in your church on the book of Revelation, but you recently preached in our series, Return of the King, and you preached a sermon on the wrath of God. And I was very interested in asking you a question related to that sermon. Okay. And the question I think would be of interest to our audience and really to me personally, and that is this: as you talk about the wrath of God, particularly as you talk through the book of Revelation in your sermon, how much of God's wrath did God absorb through the atonement that Jesus made on the cross, and how does that relate to me personally?
Yeah, great question. So in response to that, I would say that the wrath of God was totally absorbed on the cross, and that's a reason for us to greatly rejoice. In saying that, he still reserves wrath for the final day. And it is in that final day that the world will feel the full brunt of his wrath. And his wrath is his righteous indignation poured out on all unbelievers. And he poured out that righteous indignation on the cross. When he did that, I found it very interesting to study through Revelation 16. So you're dealing with the different types of judgments. You have your seal judgments, trumpet judgments, and bowl judgments. We get into chapter 16, he pours out all 7 bowls. And when you start to study them through, you have the connection to bowl 1 being the harmful, painful sores in verse 2, and then in verse 3, you've got water turned into blood, the blood of a corpse. In the bowl 3, verse 4, rivers and springs turned into blood. In verses 8 through 9, and this is in chapter 16, you've got scorching heat from the sun. And then bowl 5, you've got total darkness. And it was when I got into understanding the Euphrates River dried up in bowl 6, but the last one, when it said, "It is done," in Revelation 16, verse 17, when it said, "It is done," it made me think, where else have I heard that? And it reminded me of on the cross, when Jesus Christ said, "It is finished." And I started to make the connection between all of the wrath of God poured out on the world, and that's God's intent, has been poured out on Jesus Christ on the cross. And so if you actually work your way back from the "it is finished" and include, here's a couple things that I just noted, and I've got notes here to connect the dots. In John 19:30, he said, "It is finished," and then there's an earthquake. In Matthew 27:51 through 54, the Euphrates River drying up. You have it at crucifixion. Jesus Christ says that I thirst, John 19:28. Total darkness is mentioned in Revelation 16. In Matthew 27:45, we know there was total darkness on the cross. And then you have the exposure of the heat from the sun in verses 8 through 9. In Mark 15:24 through 25, you have the same exposure, the naked and exposed to the sun, that those who are feeling the full weight of God's wrath experience on this earth. And then you have the rivers and springs turned into blood, and then Jesus scourged and what he experienced in that. You go all the way down through bowl 2, Jesus in the garden with the water turned into blood. Now, this is where you start to say, is there a perfect match? No, not a perfect match, but a close match. Enough for me to feel comfortable as you get into bowl 1, the harmful, painful sores, how Jesus was beaten. Enough for me to feel comfortable to say, Jesus bore the full weight of God's wrath. But it also tells us that he's reserving this wrath for unbelievers at the end. So we must wake up and respond to the appeals throughout the book of Revelation to repent and to turn to Jesus Christ, who is our King and who is our answer.
Jason, thank you. That was a great answer. And I'm just glad, even as I heard the answer, that Jesus Christ took my wrath and your wrath and paid for it, and he makes that forgiveness available to anybody who will repent. Let me encourage you to listen to the sermon. It's posted on our chapel sermon series, Return of the King. And again, thank you for listening.